My name is Clara, and I learned a long time ago that in the eyes of my parents, love wasn't something you earned. It was something you bought. And apparently, I was the bargain bin version of a daughter. We were sitting in the mahogany-paneled office of Sterling and Graves, the air thick with the smell of old paper and expensive floor wax. My grandfather, Arthur, had been dead for exactly 3 days. The funeral was a blur of black umbrellas and performative weeping from my sister, Vanessa. She was wearing a designer dress that cost more than my car, dabbing at her eyes with a silk handkerchief, looking for all the world like the grieving granddaughter. I sat on the far side of the table, my hands folded in my lap. I didn't cry, not because I didn't love him, I did, but because I knew, even then, that the display of emotion was just a transaction. Arthur was a man of specific intentions, Mr. Sterling said, his voice a drone that seemed to bounce off the high ceilings. He adjusted his glasses, looking over the rim at the three of us. My mother, eyes bright with anticipation. Vanessa, barely concealing a smile. And me, the one who worked the retail shifts to pay for community college while Vanessa traveled on the family dime. The reading of the will was a formality. We all knew what was coming. The house on the hill, the trust, the family jewelry, it was all going to Vanessa. She was the one who went to the right parties. She was the one who dated the right men. To my granddaughter, Vanessa, Sterling read, I leave the estate on Willow Creek, the primary investment portfolio, and the antique collection. Vanessa didn't even try to hide her smirk. She reached over and squeezed my mother's hand. Mom beamed. They were already mentally redecorating the place, tossing out my grandfather's cluttered life to make room for minimalist modernism. Then Sterling paused. He cleared his throat and looked at me. And to my granddaughter, Clara. I didn't hold my breath. I had already accepted that I was getting a hollow sorry. I leave the contents of the hallway safe, and the watch found on the nightstand. I blinked, a watch. Vanessa let out a sharp, jagged laugh. A watch, that old thing. Grandfather used to let me play with that when I was a toddler. It stopped working back in the 90s. It's a paperweight. My father didn't say anything. He just looked at me with a mixture of pity and relief. Pity that I'd gotten so little, and relief that he didn't have to worry about my financial future anymore. Sterling reached into a small velvet bag and slid a tarnished silver box across the table toward me. I opened it. Inside sat a heavy, stainless steel wristwatch. The crystal was scratched, the leather band was cracked and stiff with age, and the minute hand was stuck at 4:12. It was heavy, unnaturally so, but it looked like junk. It looked like something you'd find at a yard sale for $5. Is that it? I asked, my voice flat. That is the extent of the specific bequest, Sterling said, closing the folder. The rest is divided between the estate and your sister's new holdings. Vanessa stood up, grabbing the keys to the Willow Creek estate from the desk. Well, Clara, at least you have a hobby now. You can try to fix it. It'll give you something to do besides failing your exams. She laughed again, a sound that cut through the silence of the office. She walked out, my parents trailing after her like loyal subjects following a queen. I stayed behind, looking at the broken watch in my hand. I didn't hate them. Hate is an active emotion. I felt something much colder, a deep, settling detachment. I knew then that I wasn't leaving with nothing. I was leaving with a reminder. But before I tell you how this broken piece of trash ended up being the undoing of my entire family, I want to ask you a question. Have you ever been pushed aside by your family for no reason other than you didn't fit their image? Let me know in the comments. I read them, and I'm looking for stories just like yours. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. This story is just getting started, and you won't want to miss how the tables turn. I took the watch. I didn't say goodbye to the lawyer. I walked out of that office into the gray afternoon, the watch weighing down my pocket. It felt like a stone, a useless, heavy stone. I drove to the bus stop, the rain beginning to mist against the windshield. I looked at the time on my phone. 4:12 p.m. The watch was stuck at the exact time I had walked out of the office. Fine, I thought. I'll get it fixed, just so I can sell it for a few bucks and get a decent lunch. I didn't know then that I was carrying the one thing that was about to burn their perfect world to the ground. I spent the next 3 days and a daze, watching through social media as Vanessa posted photos of her new mansion. She was already tearing out the library, my grandfather's favorite room, to make space for a content creation studio. My parents were in every shot, holding glasses of champagne, looking like they had finally ascended to the throne they'd been eyeing for years. Meanwhile, I was back in my cramped studio apartment, the paperweight watch sitting on my kitchen table next to a bowl of instant noodles. On Thursday, I finally decided to deal with it. I looked up the nearest watch repair shop. I didn't want a mall kiosk. I wanted someone who wouldn't laugh at me for bringing in a piece of junk. I found a place called Dumont's Horology in the old part of the city. The shop was small, tucked between an artisanal bakery and a high-end tailor. When I walked in, a bell chimed softly. The air was cool and smelled of machine oil and beeswax. An elderly man with a jeweler's loop pushed up on his forehead looked up from a workbench. "Can I help you, young lady?" he asked, his voice like dry parchment. "I have an old watch," I said, feeling a flush of embarrassment as I pulled the silver box from my bag. "It belonged to my grandfather. It doesn't work, but I was hopping. Maybe it's worth something, or at least maybe it can be cleaned up." I set the watch on the black velvet pad on the counter. Mr. Dumont didn't say anything at first. He didn't even touch it. He just stared at it. Then he slowly reached for his loop and pulled it down over his eye. He picked up the watch with a pair of soft-tipped tweezers and turned it over. His breathing changed. It became shallow, quick. "Where did you get this?" he whispered. "My grandfather, Arthur Vance. He left it to me in his will." Dumont didn't look at me. He walked to the back of the shop and flipped a switch. A high-powered forensic light flooded the counter. He began unscrewing the back casing with a tool so small it looked like a needle. "Vanessa said it was a paperweight," I muttered, trying to fill the tense silence. "She got the house and the investments. I got this." Dumont suddenly stopped. He looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something that looked like fear in his eyes, or maybe it was reverence. "Your sister," he said, his voice trembling, "is a fool, and your grandfather was a very, very clever man." He turned the watch around so the internal gears were visible under the light. They weren't made of steel or brass. They were a deep, shimmering blue, intricately engraved with symbols I didn't recognize. "This is not a watch, Clara," Dumont said. "This is a Patek Philippe 1518, but it's not a standard production. Do you see these markings? This is a refusal piece. It was commissioned in secret in the 1940s. There are only 3 known to exist in the world. The last one sold at a private auction in Geneva for $15 million. I felt the room tilt. 15 million. "And that was a standard one," Dumont continued, his hands shaking as he pointed to the engravings. "This one has something else. Look at the date wheel. It doesn't show months. It shows coordinates. And this broken minute hand, it's not stuck, Clara, it's locked." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a small, magnetized key. He touched it to the crown of the watch. There was a sharp, musical ping, and the watch suddenly came to life. The hands didn't just move. They spun rapidly backward, clicking with the precision of a high-security vault. Then the back of the watch didn't just open. It slid away to reveal a micro-compartment. Inside was a tiny, translucent slip of paper, covered in a microscopic digital code. "What is that?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. "It's an encrypted key for a cold storage crypto wallet," Dumont said, his voice barely a whisper. "And if my knowledge of your grandfather's history is correct, this isn't just a watch. It's the ledger for the entire Vance family fortune. The offshore accounts, the secret holdings, the things your father and sister don't even know exist." I stared at the shimmering blue gears. My grandfather hadn't left me a paperweight. He had left me the kill switch for the entire family empire. "If I use this," I whispered, "what happens to the house, to Vanessa's trust?" Dumont looked at me with a sad, knowing smile. "That house was bought with loans secured by the assets on this chip, Clara. If you move these assets, the loans default. The mansion, the cars, the perfect life. It all vanishes in 24 hours. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a notification from Vanessa's Instagram. A video of her throwing my grandfather's antique desk into a dumpster because it didn't fit the vibe. I looked at the watch. I looked at the microchip. "Mr. Dumont," I said, my voice steady for the first time in years. "How fast can you read that code?" Mr. Dumont didn't just read the code, he treated it like a holy relic. He connected the microchip to an offline terminal in the back of his shop, his fingers flying across the keys. I stood over his shoulder, watching as lines of data began to scroll across the screen. These weren't just numbers. They were a roadmap of my grandfather's secret life. "Look at the dates, Clara," Dumont whispered. I leaned in. The ledger showed massive transfers of wealth, millions of dollars, moving out of the primary family accounts and into this private trust starting exactly 5 years ago. That was the year my father took over as the head of the Vance family business. "My dad always said the company was struggling," I said, my heart sinking. "He told grandfather that the economy was killing the profits. That's why he said we had to live frugally, while Vanessa got her finishing school paid for by a scholarship." "The company wasn't struggling," Dumont said, pointing to a series of outgoing wires. "Your father was skimming. He was moving money into offshore shells to fund his own lifestyle, thinking your grandfather was too old to notice. But Arthur noticed everything. He wasn't losing money, he was rescuing it. He moved the entire core of the Vance fortune into this digital wallet to keep it out of your father's reach." Then I saw a specific entry. A payment of $200,000 to a private investigator, dated 3 months before grandfather died. He was investigating his own son, I realized. The terminal chimed. A final PDF document opened. It was a letter from grandfather, digitally signed and time-stamped. "To Clara, the only one who didn't ask for a piece of me while I was breathing. If you are reading this, the broken watch has done its job. Your father and Vanessa believe they have inherited the world. They haven't. They have inherited a hollow shell. The house, the cars, the investments they currently flaunt are all collateralized against the assets you now hold. You are not just the heir, Clara. You are the bank. You decide when the loans are called." I felt a cold, sharp power settle in my chest. "Mr. Dumont," I said, "Vanessa is at the Willow Creek estate right now. She's throwing away grandfather's belongings. I need to get there. Can you transfer enough of this to a liquid account so I can hire a team?" "I can do better than that," Dumont said, reaching for his desk phone. "I know the firm that handles the security and logistics for the Willow Creek district. They haven't been paid for the upcoming month yet because your sister forgot the bill. If I tell them the real owner is on her way." Before I tell you what happened when I pulled up to the mansion in a black car with a team of professional movers, I want to see your guesses in the comments. What do you think Vanessa's face will look like when she realizes she's just a tenant? I didn't go home to change. I didn't wait for a better outfit. I drove straight to the Willow Creek gates. As I pulled up, the security guards, who usually ignored me, snapped to attention. The gates swung open before I even touched the intercom. I drove up the long, winding driveway. Outside the front door, a massive industrial dumpster was already half full. I saw a familiar piece of wood sticking out from the trash. It was the leg of grandfather's hand-carved writing desk. Vanessa was standing on the front steps, wearing a silk robe, shouting at a group of workmen. "I told you, I want the marble in the foyer ripped out by tonight. This place looks like a museum, not a home." I stepped out of the car. The workmen stopped. Vanessa turned, her eyes narrowing when she saw me. "Clara, what are you doing here? I told you, if you want your childhood photos, you have until noon tomorrow to dig them out of the bin. I don't have time for your grieving granddaughter act." "I'm not here for photos, Vanessa," I said, walking toward the dumpster. I reached in and touched the wood of the desk. "I'm here to stop the demolition." "Stop it," Vanessa laughed, walking down the steps toward me. "With what? Your broken watch. This is my house, Clara. Mom and Dad are inside picking out their new sweets. You have no standing here. Get off my property before I have security throw you out." "That's funny," I said, pulling my phone from my pocket and showing her the digital deed that Dumont had just verified. "Because I just spoke with the security team. And the bank. and the holding company that technically owns every brick of this estate. I looked her dead in the eye. It turns out, Vanessa, you don't own a mansion. You're just living in a very expensive storage unit, and your lease just expired. Vanessa stared at the screen of my phone, her face transitioning from a mask of arrogance to one of pure confusion. She didn't understand the legal jargon, but she understood the red, default banner flashing across the header of the Willow Creek Estate Management portal. "This is a glitch," she hissed, her voice trembling. Dad, get out here. Clara is messing with the Wi-Fi or something." My father, Richard, stepped out onto the porch. He was wearing a new velvet smoking jacket, looking every bit the man who thought he'd finally escaped his father's shadow. "What's going on? Clara, I thought we discussed your boundaries at the lawyer's office." "We did, Dad," I said, stepping back as my hired team of movers began to unload from the black van. "You gave me a broken watch and told me to stay out of the way. I'm just following the watch's instructions." "The watch," Richard's eyes darted to my wrist, then back to my face. A flicker of recognition and then absolute terror crossed his features. He knew about the refusal pieces. He just never thought his father would actually give one to the unreliable granddaughter. "Richard," my mother asked, appearing in the doorway, "why are the workmen stopping? I wanted the foyer cleared for the party tonight." "There isn't going to be a party, Mom," I said. At that exact moment, the low hum of the mansion's central air conditioning cut out. The garden sprinklers, which had been dancing in the afternoon sun, suddenly went limp. The grand fountain in the center of the driveway gurgled and died. "The power's out," Vanessa shrieked, checking her phone. "And the cellular booster is down. What did you do?" "I didn't do anything," I said, checking my own watch, the one that was now ticking with haunting precision. "But the holding company that pays the utility bonds for this estate just liquidated its accounts. Since there was no authorized owner to sign the new standing orders, the automated system triggered a total service suspension." "Authorize it then, Richard," my mother yelled. "Call the bank." "I can't," Richard whispered, his face ghostly pale. The bank won't talk to me. They said the primary account has been moved to a cold storage vault." He looked at me, and for the first time in my life, he looked at me with respect. It was the kind of respect a man gives a predator. "You have the key, don't you?" The Podek. "Grandfather called it the truth teller," I said. "And the truth is, Dad, you've been stealing from the family for 5 years. Grandfather knew. He was just waiting for you to try and steal the house before he pulled the rug out." "Clara, listen," Richard said, stepping off the porch and walking toward me, his hands held out in a placating gesture. "We can fix this. You're a Vance. We're a team. Think of the reputation. If the neighbors see the lights go out at Willow Creek, we're ruined." "You're already ruined, Dad. I'm just the one documenting the fallout." I turned to my movers. "Start with the dumpster. Anything that was grandfather's, the desk, the books, the clocks, retrieve them. If they're damaged, document it for the lawsuit." "Lawsuit," Vanessa screamed, charging down the steps. "You're suing us, in my house." "It was never your house, Vanessa," I said, as the heavy iron gates at the end of the driveway began to close, locked by a remote command from my phone. "And as of right now, you have 1 hour to pack your designer bags before the private security team I just hired arrives to escort unauthorized guests off the premises." Before I tell you what my sister tried to do to the watch when she realized it was her only ticket back to wealth, hit that like button and drop a justice in the comments if you think she got what she deserved. Vanessa didn't pack. Instead, she looked at the heavy silver watch on my wrist, and I saw the exact moment her mind snapped. She didn't see a timepiece. She saw $15 million and the keys to her kingdom. She lunged for my arm, her manicured nails digging into my skin. "Give it to me. It belongs to the estate. It belongs to me." Vanessa's nails raked across my forearm, but I didn't flinch. For years, I had been the one to back down, the one to let her have the last word to keep the peace. But that peace had been a cage, and today the door was wide open. "Get off me, Vanessa!" I shoved her back. She stumbled, her silk robe fluttering, looking utterly ridiculous as she lost her footing on the gravel she had just ordered to be replaced with imported limestone. "You're a thief," she screamed, her voice cracking. "Dad, tell her she can't do this." My father didn't move. He was staring at the black sedan that had just pulled into the driveway. Out stepped two men in charcoal suits, private security from the firm Dumont had contacted. They didn't look like bouncers, they looked like federal agents. "Miss Clara Vance?" the lead officer asked, ignoring the screaming woman on the ground. "Yes," I said, steadying my breath. "I am the trustee for the holding company. These individuals are currently trespassing on a defaulted property. I'd like them removed, but I will allow them 30 minutes to gather essential personal effects. No furniture, no art, and absolutely no jewelry from the family vault." "You can't do that," my mother shrieked from the porch. "My engagement ring is in that vault, my grandmother's pearls." "Those pearls were purchased with company dividends that Dad diverted from the employee pension fund 3 years ago," I said, looking at my father. His eyes went wide. He hadn't realized grandfather's, truth teller, ledger went that deep. "Legally, they are reclaimed assets. If you want them back, you can argue it in front of a judge who's currently looking at Dad's embezzlement records." My father took a shaky step forward. "Clara, let's be reasonable. You don't want to destroy your mother's life. If you stop this now, I'll tell you where Arthur kept the unlisted cash. The loose stones. The gold bullion, it's not in the safe. He hid it in the floorboards of the boathouse. It's worth millions more than the watch." He was bartering with me. He was willing to sell out the secret cash just to keep the roof over his head. "I already know about the boathouse, Dad," I lied. The look of pure defeat that crossed his face told me everything I needed to know. There was a cache, and he had just confirmed it. 30 minutes, the security officer repeated, stepping between my father and me. "Start packing, or we'll be forced to assist you to the gate." Part 6, The Empty Throne. The next 30 minutes were a blur of chaos and desperation. I watched from the foyer as Vanessa ran through the house, frantically throwing designer shoes into suitcases. My mother was sobbing in the kitchen, clutching a toaster as if it were a holy relic, until a security guard politely informed her that the appliances stayed with the real estate. My father was the most chilling. He didn't pack. He just stood in the center of grandfather's gutted library, staring at the empty space where the desk had been. "He loved you more," my father whispered as I walked past. "That's what this is. He never trusted me with the legacy because he knew I'd spend it. But you're just like him. You'd rather see the world burn than see a ledger unbalanced." "He didn't love me more, Dad," I said, stopping at the door. "He just trusted me more. There's a difference. You spent 30 years trying to be the king of Willow Creek. I'm just the one who came to collect the rent." I walked outside. The movers had successfully retrieved the desk from the dumpster. It was scratched, one of its drawers hanging loose, but it was safe. As the sun began to set, the security team led my parents and Vanessa toward the gate. They had 4 suitcases between them. No cars, the leases had been revoked. No jewelry, the vault was sealed. They looked like refugees from a war they had started themselves. "Where are we supposed to go?" Vanessa screamed, her voice echoing off the silent, dark walls of the mansion. "I have 5 million followers. I can't stay in a motel." "Then I suggest you start a day in the life of a tenant series," I said. The heavy iron gates clicked shut. I stood alone in the driveway of the massive estate. The lights were still off. The house was a dark silhouette against the purple sky. I looked down at the watch. It was still ticking. But as I turned to go back inside, my phone buzzed. It wasn't a text. It was a call from a number I didn't recognize. I answered it. "Clara Vance," a voice asked. It was deep, professional, and familiar. It was Mr. Sterling, the lawyer from the will reading. "Yes." "I've been monitored the estate's status," Sterling said. "I see you've moved into the primary position, but there's something you need to know. Your grandfather didn't just leave you the watch to reclaim the house. He left it because he knew your father wasn't working alone." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "The embezzlement, the $15 million in the watch. That was just the bait, Clara. Your father was working with a third party to sell the entire Willow Creek land to a developer who is currently standing at your front gate with a court order. I looked toward the gate. A fleet of white SUVs was pulling up. The headlights of the white SUVs cut through the darkness of the driveway like searchlights. I stood on the front steps, my phone still pressed to my ear, listening to Mr. Sterling's warning. "The developer is Horizon Crest," Sterling said, his voice urgent. "Your father signed a pre-sale agreement 6 months ago. He took an $8 million advance to cover his gambling debts. If the land isn't turned over today, the contract states they can seize the property by force of a lien." "But he didn't own the land," I countered, watching as men in tactical gear and construction vests stepped out of the vehicles. "To them, he was the apparent heir. They have a signature, Clara. In this state, that's enough to start a forced eviction until a judge says otherwise. You have to find the true title. It's the only thing that can override a pre-sale." I hung up. The lead man, a thick-necked guy in a tailored suit named Marcus, marched up to the gate. He didn't look at the security guards, he looked at me. "Clara Vance, I'm Marcus Thorne. We have a court-sanctioned order to begin site preparation. Your father defaulted on the advance. This land belongs to Horizon Crest now. Move your security, or we'll have the county sheriff move them for us." "My father sold you a dream, Marcus," I shouted back. "The title is held by an irrevocable trust. You're trespassing." "We have the signature of the acting head of the Vance estate," Marcus sneered, waving a folder. "That's all we need to start the bulldozers. You have 10 minutes to clear the house." I turned and ran back inside the dark mansion. The true title. Grandfather wouldn't have left the watch as just a bank account. He would have used it as a key. I looked at the watch again. The minute hand was ticking normally now, but the date wheel, the one Dumont said showed coordinates, was spinning. I realized it wasn't just numbers. It was a compass. I followed the dial through the dark house, past the empty rooms and the gutted library, until I reached the basement. In the far corner, behind the vintage wine cellar, was a heavy oak door that hadn't been opened in decades. The watch began to vibrate against my wrist. I touched the crown of the watch to a small indentation in the door's iron hinges. Click as it change. The door didn't open. It subsided into the floor. Behind it was a room that looked like a high-tech bunker. Monitors flickered to life, powered by an independent solar grid. In the center of the room was a pedestal with a glass case. Inside was a document, but it was etched onto a sheet of synthetic sapphire. I scanned the document with my phone. It wasn't just a title. It was a dead man's clause. It stated that any sale of the property attempted by Richard Vance was automatically null and void if he was found to be in violation of the family's ethical bylaws that grandfather had carefully documented in the watch's ledger. I heard the roar of an engine outside. They were starting the bulldozers. They were going to tear down the house before I could get to a court. I looked at the monitors. They were connected to the mansion's external PA system and the neighborhood's local broadcast. "You want to play, Marcus?" I whispered. "Let's go live." I didn't just find the title. I found the footage. Grandfather had hidden cameras throughout the house for years. I saw the video of my father signing the Horizon Crest deal. I saw him taking a suitcase of cash. But most importantly, I saw Marcus Thorne handing him a folder labeled Project Erasure, a plan to illegally drain the protected wetlands behind the estate. I hit the broadcast button. Suddenly, every screen on every SUV in the driveway and every smart TV in the surrounding luxury neighborhood flickered to life with the image of Marcus Thorne bribing my father. The silence that followed the broadcast was deafening. Outside, the roar of the bulldozers sputtered and died. I watched the monitors as Marcus Thorne froze, his face illuminated by the blue light of his own tablet, which was now screaming the evidence of his crimes to the entire county. Through the external security cameras, I saw him scramble. He wasn't shouting orders anymore. He was trying to hide his face. But it was too late. In a neighborhood like Willow Creek, news travels faster than light. Within minutes, the local news helicopters, already in the air for a traffic report, diverted toward the mansion. "Shut it down," Marcus screamed, gesturing wildly at his men. "Break the doors, find the server." A group of men charged the house, but they didn't know about the bunker's reinforced steel. I sat in the glow of the monitors, my heart hammering. I wasn't just a girl with a broken watch anymore. I was the architect of their downfall. Suddenly, a notification popped up on the gate's intercom. I expected it to be the police. Instead, it was Vanessa. She was standing at the iron bars, her hair disheveled, her expensive silk robe stained with dirt. She looked into the camera, her eyes wide and bloodshot. "Clara, Clara, let me in," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "I saw the broadcast. I saw what Dad did with Marcus. I have the files, Clara, the physical ones he kept in his safe deposit box. He made me go with him to the bank last month. I can help you bury them for good." I leaned into the microphone. "Why should I trust you, Vanessa? An hour ago, you were trying to claw my eyes out for a watch you thought was a paperweight." "Because I have nowhere else to go," she sobbed, looking over her shoulder as the white SUVs began to peel away, Marcus Thorne making a desperate run for it before the authorities arrived. "They're going to take everything, Clara. If you don't help me, I'm going to jail with him. Please, I'm your sister." I looked at the sapphire title in the glass case. Grandfather's words echoed in my mind. "The house is for the one who stays." "If you want to help," I said, my voice cold as ice, "you stay exactly where you are. Hand those files to the security guard at the gate. If they're real, I'll consider letting you stay in the guest cottage. But the mansion, that's over for you." "The guest cottage," she whispered, horrified. "That's where the groundskeeper lives." "Exactly," I said. "It's a lot better than a cell." I watched as she hesitantly handed a thick manila envelope to my guard. He scanned the contents and gave me a thumbs up. Vanessa had come through, not out of love, but out of the same survival instinct that had made her a monster in the first place. But as I prepared to call the sheriff to finalize Marcus's arrest, the monitors in the bunker suddenly flickered and turned red. A new window opened. It wasn't a video, it was a countdown. Asset liquidation protocol, 10:00 minutes. My father's face appeared on the screen. He wasn't at the gate. He was in a car, speeding away, a laptop open in the passenger seat. "You think you won, Clara?" he sneered. "You found the watch, you found the bunker, but you forgot one thing. I was the one who installed the security system after Arthur died. If I can't have the Vance fortune, nobody can. In 10 minutes, the offshore accounts will self-destruct, and the encryption on that watch will wipe itself clean. You'll be sitting in a multi-million-dollar house with $0 to pay the taxes." I looked at the watch on my wrist. The blue gears were spinning frantically. "Mr. Dumont," I shouted into the phone. "He's wiping the drive. How do I stop it?" "You can't stop it from the bunker," Dumont yelled over the sound of his own crashing servers. "The override is physical. You have to bridge the connection between the watch and the primary terminal in the boathouse." The boathouse? The place where my father said the secret cache was hidden. It wasn't a cache of gold. It was the kill switch. The storm had finally broken, turning the calm waters of Willow Creek into a churning black mirror. I didn't wait for a flashlight. I ran from the bunker, my lungs burning, the heavy silver watch vibrating so hard on my wrist it felt like it was trying to tear itself apart. 7:42, 7:41. The countdown was a digital heartbeat in the back of my mind. The boathouse was a lonely structure at the edge of the property, half hidden by weeping willows. As I sprinted down the dock, the wood slick with rain, I saw a light flickering inside. I burst through the double doors. The smell of gasoline and old rope hit me. There, standing over a rusted floor panel with a ruggedized laptop, was my father. He wasn't running. He had circled back. He looked pathetic, his velvet jacket soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead. "Stay back, Clara," he yelled, holding a heavy flare gun in one hand and the laptop in the other. "I'm not letting you take it. If I hit enter on this final script, the podec becomes a hunk of scrap metal. Every cent grandfather hid disappears into the ether. You'd rather destroy it all than see me use it to fix your mess," I shouted over the wind. "It's not your mess to fix," he screamed. "It was supposed to be mine. I spent 30 years playing the part of the dutiful son while he looked at me like I was a mistake. He gave you that watch to spit on me one last time. He gave me the watch because he knew you'd do exactly this. I stepped onto the floorboards, hearing the hollow echo. Dumont told me the override is here. Move, Dad. One move and I fire, he threatened, the flare gun shaking in his hand. Give me the watch. I'll stop the wipe, we'll split the offshore accounts, and we can both disappear before the sheriff gets here for Thorne. I looked at the laptop screen. 3:15. You don't get it, do you? I said, walking slowly toward him, ignoring the gun. You think this is about the money, you think grandfather was playing a game, but he wasn't. He was building a bridge for the only person who actually loved the family name more than the bank balance. I reached out my arm, the watch glowing a brilliant neon blue. The override isn't a password, Dad. It's the pulse. I lunged forward. He didn't fire. He was too afraid of hitting the watch. I slammed my wrist down onto the laptop's sensor pad. The screen went white. 2:01, 1:30, 0:45. The blue gears on my wrist began to turn in reverse. The laptop started screaming, a high-pitched frequency that made my teeth ache. My father grabbed my shoulders, trying to pull me away, but I held on. Stop it, you're going to lock us both out, he cried. Suddenly, the floorboards beneath us groaned. The secret cache he'd mentioned wasn't gold. As the watch synced with the boathouse terminal, a hidden hydraulic lift engaged. The entire center of the floor began to rise, revealing a massive, water-cooled server rack, the physical heart of the Vance Trust. The countdown hit 0, 01. And then silence. The laptop screen turned green. Verification complete. Primary trustee, Clara Vance. Access, total. My father fell to his knees, his hands dropping to his sides. The flare gun clattered to the floor. He looked at the server rack, the millions of bits of data that now belonged entirely to the daughter he had tried to discard. It's over, Dad, I whispered. Outside, the blue and red lights of the sheriff's department began to reflect off the water of the creek. Go, I said, pointing to the back door of the boathouse where his small skiff was tied. The police are here for Marcus. They don't know you're back on the property yet. If you leave now, you can keep the head start. But if I ever see you again, I'll hand over the truth teller ledger to the DA. He looked at me, his eyes hollow and defeated. He didn't say thank you. He didn't say goodbye. He scrambled into the boat and disappeared into the fog of the creek. I stood alone in the rising server room, the watch finally silent on my wrist. But as I turned to leave, the server rack hissed, and a small printer at the base of the terminal began to whir. It spat out a single piece of paper. I picked up the slip of paper from the printer. My hands were shaking, but not from the cold. The text was short, typed in the same precise font grandfather had used for his legal documents. Clara, time is the only thing we can never get back. Use what I've saved to build something that doesn't require a vault. The house is a memory, the watch is a tool. You are the legacy. Don't look back. I stood in the boathouse as the first light of dawn began to bleed across the horizon. The police had Marcus Thorne in handcuffs by the gate. My mother and Vanessa were sitting in the back of a patrol car, not under arrest, but with nowhere else to go. I looked at the silver watch. It wasn't glowing anymore. It was just a watch ticking steadily, marking the seconds of a brand new life. 1 year later. Willow Creek Estate doesn't exist anymore. At least, not as a private fortress for the wealthy. I used the offshore funds to pay off the developer's liens, and then did the one thing my father never would have imagined. I donated the land. It's now the Arthur Vance Memorial Conservancy. The mansion was converted into a public library and a sanctuary for the arts. The grand foyer, where Vanessa wanted to rip out the marble, is now a reading room where kids from the city come to study on weekends. Vanessa lives in a small apartment downtown. She actually kept her word about the Day in the Life series, but it's not about luxury anymore. She vlogs about working at a local florist and the reality of living on a budget. We speak once a month. She's still Vanessa, but she's learning that a silk robe doesn't make a queen. My mother moved to a coastal cottage 3 hours away. She lives off a modest monthly stipend from the trust, enough to be comfortable, but not enough to fund a dynasty. She spends her time painting. She hasn't mentioned my father's name in 6 months. My father, I haven't seen him since the night in the boathouse. Every once in a while, a digital ping hits the watch's ledger from a small bank in the Caribbean, just a check-in to see if the accounts are still there. I never block him, and I never reply. I just watch the signal fade back into the dark. And me. I finished my degree. I don't work in retail anymore. I run the foundation that manages grandfather's legacy. I still wear the Patek every single day. People often stop me and ask why I wear such a beaten-up old watch when I could clearly afford something better. I just smile, listen to the steady tick-tick-tick against my wrist, and tell them the truth. It's not broken, it's just keeping perfect time. The end. Thank you so much for following this journey. If you loved seeing Clara take back her power, make sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss our next story. I want to hear from you in the comments. If you found a secret room in your house that could change your family's fate, would you open it or leave the past in the dark? I'm reading every single response. See you in the next one.